In this, our 11th lecture on the life lessons that we learn from great books, we continue in our second section to ponder the stages of our life and the decisions we make at each stage of that life. We've looked at how young Werther suffered, how Hamlet suffered, both of these youths making fatal mistakes, and we've seen how even very wise men like Plato or very brave men like Ajax can make mistakes. And we turn now to the question that after we've lived our youth, made the mistakes of middle age, how are we going to deal with old age? Old age, it is something that most of us will face, and perhaps one of the follies of young people, perhaps one of the follies of our society as a whole, is to despise old age. You know, we live in a society in which people grow older and older and older, but part of that process is trying to stay younger and younger and younger. It's terrible to get old and flabby, so we exercise our bodies without any mercy, lifting weights, jogging, swimming, all of these tortures that we go through. In fact, some of the equipment even looks like torture racks that people impale themselves upon just to stay young and healthy, to keep their heart alive so that they can go on and not be a burden upon society, because we believe that old age is a burden upon society. We even have all manners of medicine now to prolong all aspects of life well into old age. And as we examine this question of how do we live our lives, as we use Plato to show that we can make mistakes even in the fullness of our life and wisdom, we turn now to Cicero and his utterly charming essay on old age. Cicero, right along with Plato, he deserves to be in any course on the great books. He is, in fact, the Roman equivalent of Plato, a man of philosophical learning, a brilliant Latin stylist, and a true patriot. Was Cicero far more than Plato that the founders of our country admired him for his political life and principles, admired him for the purity of his Latin, and enjoyed his speeches and his philosophical works. Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, was born in 106 BC. He did not come from Rome. He came from one of the small towns of Italy, Arpinum, and his father was a very successful businessman who set about to give young Cicero the true opportunity of education. And Cicero was a brilliant student. When he was a little boy in his local school, townspeople would come in just to watch him recite his lessons. Then he went to Rome and was brilliant in university. Then he spent a very important series of years abroad in Greece, studying the way we might go on a junior year abroad, drinking deeply of Greek learning, studying Plato's philosophy, studying the philosophy of Aristotle, studying the philosophy of the Stoics that we examine when we discuss Seneca. He then modeled his Latin orations on the orations of Demosthenes, the great Greek patriot, and he became as fluent in Greek as he was in Latin. He came back and embarked upon a legal career. And he set out on this principle as a lawyer. I am going to get very rich, and I'm going to do it all honestly. And he proved that you could be an honest person and a very successful lawyer. He took cases that were dangerous, and it was a time of much political turmoil at Rome. He took cases of people that he knew were innocent, even though the system was rigged to find them guilty, and time again, his justice triumphed. So he won a reputation among his fellow citizens as a man of honesty and went into politics. And he also believed there that you could be a successful politician and yet stay honest. And he reached 63 BC, when he was still relatively young, the height of a political career in the old Roman Republic. He held the office of consul, one of the chief magistrates of the year, 2 consuls elected every year. And when he was consul in 63 BC, Rome was threatened by a rebellion, an insurgency, and civil war. And he acted with great firmness made the safety of Rome his highest concern, and once again won the admiration of his fellow citizens. But his political enemies used it against him, and on trumped-up charges they managed to get him exiled. But he bore that with dignity and then came back to Rome. And we know so much about Cicero because he left us a large series of letters, so we can look into his soul as well. And we see this man of honor and courage and patriotism who has all the flaws that we do as well. He worries about his public reputation. He worries about his children. He worries how Roman freedom will survive these tumultuous years. He believed that Rome could still keep its constitution, despite men like Julius Caesar, if all parties in the Commonwealth would put aside their differences and work together for the common good. The Concordia Ordinum, he called it, the agreement of all citizens. But he failed. And by 48 BC, Caesar had emerged as the dictator of Rome. And when he had triumphed over his enemies, Caesar offered them all an amnesty, and in particular tried to get Cicero to be part of his administration. Treated Cicero with great respect, promised him faithfully that he would give Cicero the leading position in the administration. Cicero would be his closest advisor, offered Cicero money, and Cicero turned him down. He would never serve a tyrant. And whatever the virtues of Caesar, whatever his true greatness, he was determined to destroy the political freedom of the Roman people. Caesar didn't punish him, and Cicero retired to his country estates to ponder this failure of what he saw as his entire political life. He had devoted himself to the freedom of the Roman people, and he had failed. And now they had a ruthless, successful, capable dictator. His own life was in ruins. He had divorced. His daughter would die. He was devoted to her, and her death nearly destroyed him. And his son was not turning out well. Cicero had given the young Marcus all that wealth could buy, given him a superb education. The boy had moved to Greece on a junior year abroad, but unlike his father, didn't spend his time studying philosophy, but drinking, and was already by 19 a serious alcoholic. Cicero tried to reform him, and he even had one of his son's professors live with the boy as a good example. But the boy turned the professor into an alcoholic. So there he was off in Greece drinking, spending up Cicero's money. The daughter dead, Cicero divorced and remarried. He pondered all of this failure. And instead of letting it destroy him, he wrote a series of essays, philosophical dialogues. One of them was addressed as a letter to his son on moral duties. Can an unjust act ever be expedient? Can we ever gain from doing wrong? It was to be a life lesson for his son. And he also pondered the question of old age. And in 45 BC, when he was 61 and Caesar still at the height of his power, there in what he saw as a self-imposed exile, Cicero wrote his work on old age. And it's in the form of a dialogue set about the year 150 BC, written in beautiful Latin. And the principal participants are one, Marcus Porcius Cato, one of the greatest of the Roman leaders, who had been part of that generation that transformed Rome into a superpower. And now he's an old man in his 80s, and he has given a banquet and is entertaining two young friends. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the grandson of the great general who had conquered Hannibal, and his closest friend, Lelius, called the Wise One, student of philosophy, as Scipio is a student of philosophy. So they have come to ask Marcus Porcius Cato, you might put in parentheses Cicero, tell us about old age. Because we want to live to a ripe old age, but we want to continue to be of service to our country. And Cato says, well, why do you think old age is a bad thing? Why do you even raise the question of what is old age like? I'm not asking you what youth is like. You seem to take for granted that that's a good condition to be in. So why do people blame old age? Why do people try to avoid it? Well, one, people believe that old people are useless. I think we would say that still today. Old people are useless. Secondly, that in old age you have lost your physical and mental abilities. Thirdly, that you have no sensual feelings. And fourth, you're just going to die. So there you are, useless. I think that's so wrong. But unlike Plato, Cicero does not give us abstractions. Instead, he uses historical figures. And he says, let's look at some useless old people in Roman history. Let's take Quintus Fabius Maximus. It's a man your grandfather Scipio knew well. When he was in advanced old age, having already been 3 times consul of his country, Hannibal invaded Italy. We were in a war for life and death. And at the Battle of Trasimene, 30,000 Romans had been destroyed, our army wiped out, and we believed that Hannibal would march upon Rome. And we had been led by young generals, and the crowd believed that young fighting generals were what we needed, and they'd led us to disaster. So they turned to old Quintus Fabius Maximus and said, become dictator of Rome. Now, it was a very dangerous situation. He could probably only fail. Hannibal seemed to be an invincible general. But Fabius came back into the arena and with the wisdom of old age taught us not to fight Hannibal. Pursue him, follow him everywhere he went, but avoid a major battle. And that was the strategy that led us to ultimate victory. So one man saved our commonwealth, an old man. And I could go through the roster of men who have turned out to be wise leaders in a time of crisis. Oh, how dare we say that old age is useless? That wisdom will guide us. Cicero might come back today and say, well, let's look at President Ronald Reagan. He was pretty elderly for a political career, and yet many believe him to be one of the most successful presidents in our country's history. And today we'll look at a candidate and say, well, does he or she, since they're elderly, have the vigor and vitality to be president, to answer the telephone in the middle of the night and make the right decision, or will their minds not be fogged up by old age? Well, Cato or Cicero would come back and tell you, time and time again, it has been the eldest of statesmen who had the wisdom to lead a country. So old people are not useless. Are you going to tell me that a grandfather or grandmother that is able to sit down and be a teacher to a child is useless? Are you going to tell me that a grandfather or grandmother that can sit down with a teenage child and explain to them from an objective point of view what their parents can't reach them with and has that distance of authority, that is not useless? Any time you can shape an individual or a nation, you are not being useless. So it is the arrogance of youth to even say, do old people have any use? But then you say, well, you can't have much use because your physical and mental abilities have lessened so much. You know, you're senile, that's the very word for it. Well, first of all, Romans have always believed, like the Spartans, that age brings wisdom. What do we call our most important deliberative body? The Senate. That's what we call it in our own country today, don't we, the United States. What does Senate come from? By the same word you just used, senile. It is the elders. What do the Spartans call their deliberative assembly? The Gerousia, the council of the elders. Why, nobody could even be elected to the council of the elders in Sparta unless they were over 60 years of age. So wisdom comes with old age, not mental weakness. Let me ask you a question, young Scipio. Can you run as fast now as you did when you were 15? And could you run as fast when you were 15 as you did when you were 2? Well, you ran much faster when you were 15 than you did with 2, right? So is this to say that infancy and toddlership is a bad thing because you can't perform the same physical activities? Each stage of life, and we forget this, says Cicero, has with it its own abilities and obligations. Now let me ask you another question. Are you useless because you can't carry an cow or an ox from one end of a field to the other, one end of a stadium to another. Well, there have been Greek athletes who could do that. You can't. You never can. But that doesn't mean your physical abilities are impaired. Mental abilities? I think I am wiser now than I was when I was your age. The older you get, the more you read, the more you learn, the more you have life lessons. Oh, there's some things you don't do as well. It's harder to speak to an audience. As I have gotten older, my voice has begun to fail, but I'm far more effective in one-on-one conversations because I've developed a sense for what people are like. So now I shift my political activities, and you know I remain very active in the Senate. I shift my political activities to convincing people in small committees. But from time to time, I still get up and I give a speech that moves them. And I see that we must destroy our ancient enemy Carthage once and for all. And so every speech I give, I end with, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. And they always say, oh, here comes Cato, he's going to give that speech again. But they always jump to their feet when I have finished. So our mental abilities, if we keep them sharp. Now, if you let them be squandered, that's something totally different. But I think about Solon, the old Athenian. I learn something new every day. What I have done in my older years is to learn Greek. We had to enter into the world of Greece, become involved in the Middle East, where Greek is the dominant language, and I have learned Greek. I speak it very well now. People said, you're too old to learn a foreign language. Not at all. And I have studied Greek literature. I have studied the masters of Greek oration. I have even dabbled in their philosophy, but I think that's probably a waste of time. I like Greek history, though. I have read the works of Thucydides and Herodotus. And more than that, I keep a sharp eye on the politics of Greece. So my mind is constantly growing. Not a bad piece of advice for any of us. Learn a new language. One of the most amazing things you can do, whatever age you are, is to learn a totally different language. And he gives us that same advice today. So I keep my mind sharp in that way, and I do exercise. As I say, I cannot lift 200-pound weights, but I exercise. I keep sharp and vigorous. So I have different, perhaps, mental and physical abilities than I did when I was your age, but they are just as valuable. And we don't feel sensual pleasures anymore. Well, that is just total nonsense. Now, there's some I don't want to feel anymore. I have no interest in a love life. I can't imagine somebody prolonging all of that misery year after year. It's gone, and so what? It's good. Because then I can simply focus on other things. I have wonderful relationships with women now, not trying to seduce them. It doesn't matter. So that's a pleasure you pass away, but others come in its place. You say, well, can you even enjoy your food anymore? Well, absolutely. Why, do you know that we have lovely banquets, an elderly group of men, and we meet together and have these banquets? And we don't have to worry about networking. That's what I had to do when I was your age. And they were all some really political event. And you always had your agenda. Now we're just old friends talking. And we talk about anything we want to. And that brings us a lot of pleasure. I've learned a lot more about music. And we can now have our meals accompanied by music and simply sit and listen in all that enjoyment. No, I think that's a lot better than going to brothels myself. Sensual pleasures? If I want to have 3 wines with lunch, I do. I don't have to get back and do anything. And that's a pleasure for me just as well. And you know something else? When I was a young person, your age, I never had any interest in farming. I owned farms, but I was too busy. And now one of the greatest sensual pleasures I have is growing things. I like to get out in that garden and plant and water. I'd like to raise a cabbage and bring it to my table and cook it up myself and eat it. I love growing grapes and then watching them made into wine and drinking it. That whole activity was closed to me. Why, I know a number of Romans who have sort of left political service at the age of 60, and everybody said they're going to be dead soon. Some are still over 100, having spent 40 years just farming, somehow that farming and growing reinvigorates. So there's a whole world of sensual pleasures that I was cut off from and didn't recognize. What a wonderful thing old age is. And finally you say to me, well, you're going to die. I hear that today. Once you retire, you only have one more big event left to look forward to. Anybody ever said that? You're going to die. Well, I tell you, young Scipio and young Lilius, you're going to die too. We're all going to die. And in fact, none of us knows when we're going to die. I hope this doesn't happen to you, but you could walk out of my villa and a roof tile could fall on your head and kill you. It's happened to other people. Be driving home tonight. We might. And be killed just like that. 16-year-old who's just gotten her license could be killed. So we never know when death is going to come. And it doesn't bother me. Not just that I've lived a rich and full life, but rather because I deeply believe in the immortality of the soul. That is what Plato taught. That is in fact how Marcus Porcius Cato, if I could look into the future, my descendant, would spend his last hours reading Plato's treatise, the Phaedo, on the immortality of the soul. And in that treatise, Plato has Socrates tell us that ultimately you can never prove that the soul is immortal. But I believe in it. And in that belief that my soul will continue, and that all of my good actions will be rewarded, and any evil deeds I have done will be punished, that I will ultimately go to God in my soul, in that belief, I find, as Plato said, a fair prize and a great hope. So the end of life will find me ready whenever it comes, knowing that my soul will live on. So I hope I've shown you just a little bit of why old age is something that I cherish, why I don't try to act young, dress young, speak in a youthful fashion, and why I respect every stage of life. Well, so the dialogue came to its end, but Cicero's life was not over. He was now a man in his 60s. And in 44 BC, only a few months after he had finished his dialogue on old age, sort of a swan song, a farewell, saying he would never go back into politics, on March the 15th, the Ides of March, 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. The conspirators Brutus and Cassius had not made Cicero part of their conspiracy. 63 other senators were involved in it. They had not asked Cicero. Two reasons. One, they knew he was an honest man. And then as an honest man, he would have gone to Caesar and said, I despise your attempt to become king of the Romans, but I will not let you be murdered. But secondly, they said he's too old. You know, he's garrulous. He'll just ramble on. He would divulge the conspiracy. I mean, he's an old man and senile. So they ignored him. But when Caesar lay dead, the conspirators had no real plan of how to replace him. And within days, they had been driven from Rome, and Mark Antony, Caesar's closest associate, had gathered all real power into his hands and was determined to reestablish a dictatorship. Now Cicero, this elderly man, went back to the Senate. You were a senator for life. And his friends said, what are you doing back here? And he said, I have come to oppose Antony. This is the last chance to restore freedom to Rome. You are too old to undertake this mission. Not even younger men can bring the Roman people back. The Roman people want dictatorship. They no longer want political freedom. They want to be removed of all the responsibilities and obligations of freedom. You will die if you attempt this. That doesn't matter to me. So he stood up on the floor of the Senate, and he gave some of the most remarkable and moving speeches in the history of political oratory. his Philippics, his denunciation of Mark Antony, and Antony's attempt to become a tyrant. And he spoke out. He called Antony a usurper, a pervert, a man who was determined to assassinate his country. And you, Antony, with Antony there in the room, you, Antony, are worse than Caesar. He at least was a man of ability. He was a general. He was a writer of great ability. And you are a drunkard and a gambler. But he didn't just speak. He maneuvered. And when the young son, adopted son of Caesar, the young Octavian, appeared in Rome, he went to the house of Cicero. And Cicero said, I will join you, young man, in the effort to drive Antony out of Rome and to restore freedom to our Roman people. Again, the friends told Cicero, the young Octavian is just using you. He'll become a dictator just like Caesar. Cicero said, let him use me. We'll drive Antony out and then we'll get rid of him. This is politics. It's a dirty business. If you don't have the stomach for it, that's fine, but I do. So he went back into the dirty political arena to serve his country. And indeed, Mark Antony was driven out. Octavian was made consul of the Roman people. And then he reached an agreement with Antony, coming together to pursue the conspirators Brutus and Cassius, who had killed Julius Caesar, the father of Octavian. But part of the deal by which Antony agreed to join his forces with those of the young Octavian was that Cicero be killed. And Octavian said, but Antony, he's like a father to me. I've sworn always to protect him. He is doing no harm. And Antony said, well, he did a lot of harm to me when he got up on that rostrum and called me a drunken, perverted gambler. I want him dead. And so the police came to arrest Cicero, 43 BC. They found him at his country villa, and he's always a very human figure. And at first he thought maybe he would try to flee. But then he came to himself and said, no, I have written that death will come when it will come. So the policeman came to him. He offered up his throat and said, strike here, boys. So he died, a patriot. Antony was so vengeful that he had the hands of Cicero cut off because of the gestures you make in Roman oratory, and he had his tongue cut off. And the hands and the tongue of great Cicero were nailed to the speaker's platform where he had attacked Antony. So died this patriot, the old man who stood up for freedom. Whenever I ponder whether old people should be in politics, I think about Benjamin Franklin. Now, he was the oldest of our delegates at the Constitutional Convention. Rather infirm, bad case of gout. He had been there at the Declaration of Independence as well. Now, there was nothing easier than for him to retire, particularly because it seemed to be a very dubious enterprise whether this Constitutional Convention will even work. But he put his great reputation on the line, went to those meetings, and then, at the critical moment, when there were still raucous debates inside the convention about whether to adopt the Constitution, and the majority was leaning towards the idea, it's getting to be late September, let's leave, come back, let a new group look at what we've done. In other words, go back into committee. Franklin stood up and said, I am an old man. I have seen much in my life, and I have learned one thing. Nothing human is perfect. Everything we do is flawed. We could go back, come back next year, maybe come up with a better Constitution, but let us give this Constitution to the people. And he swayed them, and they signed that Constitution. And as the signing was going on, Franklin kept looking at the chair of George Washington. And Washington said, what are you doing, doctor? People thought, again, this is a senile old Franklin. He said, there's a sun on painted on the back of your chair. I have often wondered whether that is a rising or a setting sun. And now I know it is the rising sun. And he told the old lady as he walked out, Madam, you have a republic if you can keep it.